This month on In the Life.
Next we present Everett Moran.
The Cultural Divide.
When I walk down the street by myself, I'm not read as queer.
Spreading a new kind of faith.
Take away this hair that's jacked up to Jesus and I'm just a bingo gal from Minnesota.
And setting the medical community straight.
Genitals that look different are okay. They just look different.
All this and Harvey on America's gay and lesbian news magazine, In the Life.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by the Ford Foundation, the Overbrook Foundation, the Pride Foundation, and these funders. And the annual support of In the Life members like you.
I made up my mind. It's time for me to shine. This moment is all The causes of homophobia are complex and as difficult to understand as the actions they inspire. Tonight, In the Life tries to untangle one facet of this complicated web, gender. I'm RuPaul, and who better to walk you through this episode of American Gender, looking at how do I look? How our culture defines it.
There is such a thing as gender, and it's not the same as sex.
How we bend it.
Hot dog, we've got a wiener!
How they regulate it.
I don't like looking at that. How's that?
How do I look? How do I feel? In a culture where most women take home only 75 cents and women of color just under 68 cents for every male dollar earned, gender has profound impact on how we live, particularly where it intersects with race, ethnicity, class, and ability. The problem is further complicated by the reality that most people just don't fit comfortably in the binary system of male and female. But there's long been a push to broaden the definitions of gender, not simply as a matter of ideological principle, but because gender roles have historically changed to accommodate the needs of society. In binary culture, we look at some big shifts in what the next generation is doing to push our thinking even further.
Before industrialization, everyone in a whole family worked together. What industrialism did is it pulled men out of their houses to factories or to other kind of workplaces and left women at home, but that's only the theory. They were doing industrial work at home for wages while they were supposedly taking care of their homes and kids.
Hello, operator. Give me Pennsylvania 65000.
Everyone suffers from wars, but ironically, sometimes women benefit because the guys go away. The somewhat hidden truth about the World War II jobs is that they were very hard, they were really dirty, there were a lot of industrial accidents, and women loved them. The government played a very active role in managing the labor force. Starting in around 1940, they were propagandizing all over the place about how women could work and still be, quote, feminine, could be good wives. After the war, they reversed it and started a large propaganda campaign about how mothers belong at home. Gender then gets used as a club with which to beat people. The main heterosexual privilege that women have is the fact that they're attached to men who earn bigger salaries.
But the relationship between gender and sexuality and the economics of both took a new turn in the second wave of the women's movement.
When I came out in the mid-70s, it certainly made me question my gender suitability.
Here she is. She is single and fun-loving.
And as the movement shaped a single identity, woman with a capital W, gay identity complicated femininity.
I worried about whether I was feminine enough, knowing I was attracted to girls and being a tomboy. And that scared me enough that it kept me from coming out. It kept me from feeling good about myself for a very long time.
There had always been a conservative edge of the women's movement that was extremely frightened of the homosexuality issue, for fear that the women's movement would lose its respectability if it was associated with what Betty Friedan called the lavender menace. I think actually that was always a very minority position. I think that the masses of people in the women's movement were really quite open to challenging and thinking about sex and gender in different ways. Probably the single most important message of second wave feminism was that there is such a thing as gender and it's not the same as sex.
And today's activists are charging forward in this belief.
I like to say that there are many genders. It's the way we, as individuals, are socialized and how we adapt. For some folks, it's how they get up in the morning and the clothes they pick out, to the people that they desire and want to date, to the way they hold their cup or their pen, to folks then also thinking about anything from hormones or surgery, to people thinking about you know, how that impacts their sexuality.
I always felt this sort of sense of like, I didn't quite know what being a woman, you know, an American woman meant. I was born here, but my parents being immigrants were really sort of outsiders in a lot of ways. I remember there were all these rituals that these girls in my school would do around makeup and hair and shaving, and I remember feeling very awkward and uncomfortable and like I didn't know what I was doing. My mother, who I think of because of her strength and her real independence, I think of her as a femme, but she certainly wasn't someone who was going to teach me these things about what it meant to be a girl. I went to a college where there were a lot of white, mostly middle-class dykes, and everyone had the same sort of short buzz cut and baggy pants and shirt look. I cut off all my hair, I did the whole androgyny drag thing. I was miserable, and I felt like I was in drag.
You try and tell a femme who is like a feminist not to be femme, and feel like this is her political expression to be femme and to be lesbian and be all that she is, you know? You try and tell her. You know, it's not gonna happen.
There's always the suspicion that a femme isn't really queer because look how feminine they are, and everything feminine is not radical, right?
Butch femme, that is like the most freeing thing for folks, to finally have some way to say like, this is my expression and I get it.
I've had experiences with people who said things to me like, free yourself from your enslavement, and sort of coaching it as a joke, but I knew that there was an edge underneath that was like, you're a dupe of the gender system.
Every social movement has this danger of getting into this hardened kind of orthodoxies, right line, and forgetting the sort of let a thousand flowers bloom approach.
My father raised me in a way that I could do anything that I wanted to do. Even though like I was forced to wear frilly dresses and I had pink cakes, he raised me to be very independent and still values that. But I don't think society on a whole thinks that way a lot about girls and women.
I think it's hard for people to conceive of femme without butch because, let's face it, when I walk down the street by myself, I'm not read as queer. And I know that, you know, unless I was wearing something that would signify that. But when I'm walking down the street with a butch who's my lover, then I'm read as queer. So I think that that's why femme often gets discussed in relation to butch, and it frustrates me because I'm just as queer, even if I may not be read as such, whether I'm with a butch or someone butch identified or by myself.
People who are not seen on top because they don't fit those categories on like race and class and age and gender identity, like need to fight as much like within the LGBT community as we do on other levels, you know, outside of the LGBT community.
Things that are masculine are assigned much more value than things that are feminine, and that's true in the queer community too. In many segments, I mean, it might get played out differently depending on different things, but that femme's not worth talking about as an identity by itself when it has a really rich, you know, history. I'm like one of many, and there are many people out there who do femme very differently than me.
I would dare say that gender is the most powerful social, cultural pressure there is.
So I really identify as a butch fag, which brings up a lot of issues. When I started to feel, you know, like more comfortable in being butch, I started to find myself more attracted to men, and it scared me so much because I'm just like, what does this mean? Like, even like thinking about like how I'm gonna talk about this with my family is gonna be really difficult because the language that I have for it is in English, and I don't have this language in Spanish. Like, to my family, I'm a lesbian. And I'm fine with being a lesbian to my family, or like I'm gay, you know, like, and that's fine because that's the only word I could come up with to like express who I am and that they understand.
How young little children are when they know that they're either a girl or a boy. It takes much longer to learn what race you are and what class you are. It's gonna be hard to break that down. It's very, very rooted. And it straitjackets everyone.
But college students like Everett Moran are putting a new spin on an old tradition.
Every year, Vanderbilt for Homecoming elects Mr. Vanderbilt and Miss Vanderbilt, and together they are the perfect heterosexual couple. They are a king and queen, a royal couple. King and queens are usually married. They are a couple together. So when we have a king and queen as the top representative of the senior class, they are a heterosexual couple. It is an assumption of heterosexuality.
Homecoming is pretty important here at Vanderbilt. The traditions are the same as they were, you know, 10, 20 years ago.
When I stand on a football field at a homecoming event in a dress as a man, I'm not only threatening heterosexual power, but I'm also threatening male power.
Next we present Everett Moran from Midland, Texas.
I arrived at the football stadium in a very tasteful, empire-waisted black cocktail dress. Then we all just walked out in a line, stood out on the field, presented as the homecoming court to the entire community, and then they announced King and Queen. I'm an officer for the undergraduate GLBT group here at Vanderbilt, and we came together a few weeks before nominations were due, the officers, and discussed what we wanted to do. And I proposed that we present it to our membership and see if they wanted to nominate anybody for King and Queen, and then if they wanted to play with gender a little bit and nominate a boy for Queen and a girl for King.
There wasn't any like opposition during the time of the voting and the judging process from anybody. It was when he made the top 5, or actually was the top 6 this year, that was when all the letters started rolling into the Hustler and the opposition came up.
A lot of people don't understand gender stereotypes, gender roles. They don't understand heterosexism. They don't understand homophobia. They don't even understand homosexuality for that.
I think we stayed within the traditions, and I don't think that we disgraced the campus at all. I think different times call for different needs, and, you know, times are changing. Vanderbilt is not the first campus to have a male queen candidate.
You can blur the line between what's man and woman, male and female by playing with that just a little bit. And that was one of the big reasons why I chose to do this, because that boundary needs to be pushed, especially at a place like Vanderbilt.
People did vote for Everett, and that's why he did make, you know, the top 6 after that. Student body voted for him. And I think that it generated a lot of conversation. I think that it's something that was very positive for the Vanderbilt campus. I think that a lot of students learned a lot from it and were forced to talk about issues that might make them uncomfortable.
Sometimes what gets lost in the conversation is that the only people that play with their gender are people who identify as trans.
You know, as someone who identifies as transsexual, and, you know, I have a very healthy respect for the binary, the understanding of sex, male, female. At the same time, very clear that, you know, I'm not trying to use it in an oppressive way. I'm not trying to, like, check it off. I'm not disvaluing one sex over the other. You know, my whole show, B4T, is on the basis of what it was like of butchness, or the androgyny in the period of time in my life. The androgyny wasn't necessarily an identity of mine, but that's how I looked. And people spent more time trying to figure out who I was than sort of like, hi, my name is Imani.
Someone once recently asked me how long I've been transgendered. And I simply replied, well, all my life. Many people in the transgender community do not undergo a linear transition from one to the other. Many don't undergo a medical transition. I had an entirely non-medical transition. Gender has been medicalized, but I don't believe that I have a gender identity disorder. I think it's society that has a gender identity disorder.
Cutting your nails, growing your hair, wearing certain colors, all are gendered within our society.
We're going to open up the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-4.
This is what characterizes GID. A persistent discomfort with his or her sex or sense of inappropriateness in the gender role of that sex.
Okay, perfect. You did great. You got it. We're crazy. Here's another copy of the DSM-4, and what I'd like you to do is open that up, marked with the bookmark with some sandpaper on it, and I'd like for you to give this a try.
However you want to like dismantle it or mess it up, you know, make it messy.
Well done. Perfect.
I can't understand it.
Once you make it messy, it becomes interesting and you can sort of have a conversation about it.
Remember, a round of applause for our volunteer.
Yeah, undoubtedly a lot of confusion and conflict will come out of it. But I personally like confusion and conflict and working through that to figure out like, well, what the hell is the underlying force of this, you know?
Part of what true gender liberation looks like is the ability to be free from the expectation of a fixed gender identity.
When people see representations that don't fit within it, they're confused because that's all they've been fed their entire lives. That's what they see as normal. That's what they see as appropriate. That's what they see as American.
Advanced industrial societies have evolved economically to the point where the rigid gender roles of the 19th and early 20th centuries have become obsolete and indeed an impediment to market capitalism in the 21st century.
In the 19th century, or the first half of the 20th century, no one would have understood. People are not born destined to live out a certain kind of life in the social division of labor.
So much of our society is built upon this idea of production and profit and getting ahead.
The same way that I don't say, oh, lesbian and gay men somehow created transphobia. I don't look at white people as creating racism. I look at it as systematic. And in fact, it belittles racism when it's some individual thing. No, this is a system.
For there to be like a white man and for them to call black men boys and black women girls, like that's like part of like the foundation that this country was brought up on.
This is a case in which I think that the gender and the racial meanings are organized into a really universal kind of class domination meaning. That boy or girl are always what you call the people who you are dominating in class terms.
We need to be respectful and we need to be inclusive, all the various forms of expression in our community, because this is how we're oppressed in greater society.
We'd driven to Los Angeles to play in this tournament, and Perry T. Jones, who was the czar of Southern California tennis, said that, oh, little girl, you can't be in the photo because you don't have a tennis dress. That was the first day in my life I'd ever even seen a tennis dress. My mother made me these white shorts, but I didn't realize they had tennis dresses or tennis skirts. I promised myself I'd change things if I could as time would go on. Hi, I'm Billie Jean King, and you're watching In the Life.
We may not always consider how much our world is regulated by fixed gender concepts, but one example is how the FCC is working toward eradicating indecency. The guidelines are widely subject to interpretation, and when these policies are applied to trans people, regulators usually take a black and white approach. As In the Life visited with filmmaker Emily Goldberg to discuss her film Venus of Mars, concerns were raised about showing Venus's minimally concealed breasts by parties who referred to Venus's chest as male breasts. And while the FCC doesn't specifically regulate even fully exposed male breasts, Venus's gender identity complicated the process. In the end, an amicable compromise resulted in black bars covering the breasts in question. But the incident left us thinking that what often gets overshadowed when we try to define gender are the everyday stories of LGBT people who don't fit in the binary world.
I met Venus when she was still Steve, and I'd seen him perform with this rock band, and I was just absolutely blown away. I was like, this is David Bowie, you know, incarnate.
Let's see, All the Pretty Horses with transvestite lead vocalist. Yeah, transvestite, take a look at those.
And then a few years later, I knock on the door, and there's Steve with breasts, you know, and wearing a low-cut vinyl bra, and I said, can we have lunch?
I scare transgender people. They get uncomfortable around me. I'm creepy, I'm scary.
I was just curious about this really dramatic transition in someone that I knew but didn't know very well. And so that's sort of how it began.
I don't really think of myself as either male or female. Medically, I'm in between. I didn't know that I would feel comfortable at this point. I thought I would probably eventually go all the way with surgical change, but I found a strength and a uniqueness being in between.
Liza Kitty.
I feel it heating. I don't think people up here realize that there's more out there than sweatpants and flannel shirts and the Vikings.
We need people like this in Duluth. We need an awakening, I think.
I think they're very talented. But they're guys dressed as chicks, and I don't like looking at that. How's that?
It's so easy for people to categorize people and say, well, I don't understand you, you're weird. Venus lives in the Midwest. It's really important, probably more important for Venus and the band to be playing places where they don't see transgendered people.
You look at this incredible glam fetish band, and you think, oh my God, he must be out partying every night, and he must be, you know, living in a dungeon or something, but, you know, he's married, he's got a totally normal life. I watch him play with his cats and work in his garden. His wife's an English professor. If you take the transgender piece out of it, it's Ozzie and Harriet.
When I found out that Steve was still married, I was absolutely fascinated by how does a couple negotiate that kind of dramatic gender identity change within a relationship.
About a year and a half or so after we got married, I guess the honeymoon period was over. Steve! He was getting progressively crankier and crankier, and I didn't know why.
I was really going through this period of identity crisis. I had to decide what I was going to do. We just couldn't deal with having the marriage dissolve. And so that's when I told Lynette. I told her that I wanted to be female, that I was transsexual.
What I wanted to do was to show that these people are not so different. And as time went on, I realized it was a film about any long-term relationship.
You're bad. You're really bad. There are things about him that I discovered that I didn't know before that make me love him more, you know. And it's hard to imagine starting over with somebody else. It really is, finding somebody else like him. And even the parts that drive me nuts are things that I love about him, and I would probably seek out in someone else very much like him. And so it's like, well, what's the point? Might as well work on this.
Both Venus and Lynette have said to me it was almost like therapy for them making this film and being able to talk to me about what they'd been through.
Most couples don't survive. Most couples fall apart. It's a hard journey. It's a real hard road to go down. It's hard for one person to go down it. It's hard when a second person feels like they're getting dragged along without a choice.
Do you think Lynette is exceptional in her ability to understand and work through all this with you?
Yeah, I do.
There have been a lot of documentaries done about people changing gender, and what made this different was it was about how does that impact a marriage. And the other thing that was different about it too is that Venus wasn't having a sex change. You know, she's in between, and she's staying in between, maybe in part to preserve her relationship.
Sometimes I worry about that. Is he not being true to himself, you know, that sort of thing. But he says no. He says that this is the road he would have ended up with anyway. So I have to believe that. But again, that's another thing that you really don't know until you've gone through the test of time.
I wish that it wouldn't be such an issue for me. I wish that it wasn't something that made Lynette feel like she was being dragged along, something unknown and scary. I think that we have dealt with it better than I could have dreamed, but it's not perfect.
I mean, ideally, I'd like for people to walk away from this with a deeper understanding of what it is to be human, and that we're not as different from each other as we think we are. There's all the, the complications of, marriage, relationship, blah, 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 but when it comes right down to it, we're all just part of this human struggle, and that's what I want people to take away from it.
I've been in show business for 22 years, and after 11 years of doing shows and clubs all over America, I hit the big time. Nothing like that had ever happened in this country or in the world before, and it was a blessing. It makes you sort of long for those days again, given the current political climate we're in. I mean, we're basically living in the 50s right now. Could a RuPaul happen in today's climate? I'm not so sure. When I was growing up, I had Cher, I had David Bowie, I had Diana Ross, amongst so many other sort of really out-of-the-box performers. Most of the people you see out there today are, homogenized, packaged, prepackaged. It's all there. And I thought, you know what? I really need to be out there and visible for young kids, not just young gay kids, but just young kids to see that there are other colors in the crayon box to use. Hi, I'm RuPaul, and you're watching In the Life. Drag performers have long played with the concept of gender, moving comfortably along the spectrum of possibilities that have entertained and enlightened the masses. For one Midwesterner, the art of old school drag has even helped transcend the cultural divide between church and gays. Miss Richfield is a self-defined throwback to simpler times, but as you'll see, she's a complicated character with a wit and style all her own. A beauty pageant winner from Minnesota, she's an active church member, lives in a trailer park, and is a self-proclaimed minister of beauty. And through beauty, she's bringing the best of Minnesota to the masses. Created by Russ King, Miss Richfield 1981 is a lively character with a story all her own.
I grew up in a home of 4 boys. I was the youngest, and it was a very conservative Christian home. My parents, they were very strict with us. We didn't dance, we didn't go to movies, we didn't play cards, so my knowledge of pop culture is very limited. I never really wanted to be a woman. That was never the case. I think Miss Richfield, 1981, is a throwback to a more traditional sense of drag. I don't wear any boobs, I don't wear hips, and so there's no illusion there. I don't wear a girdle, and so it's a very much more natural. It's obviously a guy in a dress.
Thank you, everyone! Thank you so much! And welcome to our lovely program here.
There's also a sense of appreciation for what Miss Richfield is, and that's the gloves that match the shoes and the handbag and sometimes a hat and all of those details, all the things that women don't have to deal with today. Miss Richfield is a woman who I refer to as a gal who has clawed her way to the middle. I was there in Augsburg Park, and there was 11 contestants that year. And 1981 was a very big year for beauty. And there's another gal right in front of me, Trudy Olson, who was kind of one of our bigger gals. And she was twirling 3 flaming batons, lost control, took out the whole front row of contestants in a terrible fire. Oh, I don't know if you've seen taffeta burn, but badly. I was the only gal to stop, drop, and roll. Because when you live in a trailer, you know what to do in case of fire. You're not getting out of a window that's big. You know what I'm saying? And there was only one contestant left. That's right, yours truly. It only took the judges about, 15, 20 minutes to deliberate. And then they gave me my beautiful sash and my lovely tiara and the power lawnmower.
I want to just take a few moments and play you something that I played that day for the pageant.
Also extremely narcissistic, extremely self-involved. Not realizing that, I think, is what makes her so charming. They like my home-style sense of life, my practicality. I mean, really, when you think about it, you take away my fabulous gowns, my beautiful eyewear, my Broadway sound that takes a house down every night. Take away this hair that's jacked up to Jesus, and I'm just a bingo gal from Minnesota. Just a simple gal. And are you single?
Tonight I am for you, Miss Richfield.
Call the next number!
G53. B6.
Call the next number!
G57.
Wait a minute! No, you have a bingo over there?
G57.
Yes.
53. 46.
You're kidding. As we say at the VFW in Richfield, hot dog, we've got a wiener!
At Miss Richfield's church, members constantly raise money to send her on trips. She believes they're sending her off to share her ministry with the world. What she doesn't notice is that they always give her a one-way ticket.
Genuine civil union, going to New Jersey for a limited domestic partnership, going to Hawaii to be reciprocal beneficiaries, going where it's legal to love.
Miss Richfield represents a speak that women generally don't use anymore. A sort of way of insulting you, but phrasing it as a compliment.
Stand up. The humidity. Isn't it? I mean, honestly. This frosted look is coming back. I mean, if any of you gals have that 80s sort of frosted look that she's got going, hang on to it. Why? I know. That's what I say. Why? Why I have mine done? I know.
She represents a throwback to the past. That simpler and sort of an underdog characteristic that makes people want to get behind her and help her out.
Miss Richfield is the embodiment of everything that Minnesota tries to keep under that Minnesota nice guys. Miss Richfield is the best because she can break down any kind of stereotype.
How many cities in the United States have a mayor that would come to a fun thing like this and sing with a gal like me?
My boring 9-to-5 job is mayor of Minneapolis, but my real job is to be the spear carrier for Miss Richfield's little carnival that she does throughout the city of Minneapolis.
For decades, treating intersex children was a matter of surgically altering genitalia to normalize the child's gender. One measure of successful gender reassignment is a consummated sexual relationship with a member of the opposite sex when the child reaches adulthood. And some argue that this is the place where genderphobia clearly intersects with homophobia. Now there's a growing movement to shift gender identity out of the hands of medical professionals and back to the individuals who will ultimately live with the choices made in their name. Tonight, in Size Matters, we'll visit with some people behind this movement.
When she was born, we thought we had a boy. We brought her home. 5 days later, we found out that she wasn't a boy, she was a little girl.
These gangs of medical residents who would come into my room and turn the light on in the middle of the night and force my legs apart.
I cried. I asked them if they were crazy.
They cut my clitoris off of me. It was amputated from me.
These are the personal stories from people whose lives have been affected by something that is little known and rarely discussed.
My mother didn't think she had a choice. She was told that without it, I would be a miserable, unhappy person, possibly be a lesbian, possibly have gender identity issues, and it needed to be done.
The stories of people affected by a condition called intersex.
Intersex, very briefly and very simply, is just a variation of chromosome or genital differences that don't match what society and medicine call standard male and female. I was born with something called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is a form of intersex. I was born with an enlarged clitoris. It was quite enlarged, actually. It was about 3 centimeters long at birth. Like I said, they didn't know if I was a boy or a girl. Once they determined that I was a girl because I had a uterus and ovaries, I was then scheduled for what they call feminizing surgery, and at the age of 3 months, I underwent a full clitorectomy. In my medical records, it says that the clitoris was amputated to the nub.
An intersex person, in a way, it's a kind of new concept. It derives from an older idea of a hermaphrodite, that is someone who is a mixture of male and female tissue. How you define intersex or how you define hermaphrodite has been the subject of medical, religious, and legal debate for centuries.
It originally was used in the late 1800s to refer to bisexual people. Then it moved into referring to people who had gender identity issues. And finally, in about probably the 1960s and 1970s, it began to be used for people born with what was commonly called before then hermaphroditism. The problem with the word hermaphrodite is people think about Hermaphrodites from Greek mythology, and they think that it means people are born with 2 full sets of genitals, and that can't happen. That's biologically impossible. The other issue with hermaphrodite is it's quaint and it's Victorian, and it just doesn't really represent very well.
The most common intersex disorder that we see is congenital adrenal hyperplasia. That one makes up about 60% of the intersex disorders, and they occur worldwide about 1 in 15,000 births. In the United States, it's probably closer to 1 in 30,000. So if you're looking for an absolute number, it's hard to give a specific number, but probably somewhere in the range of 150 to 300 cases in the United States a year of intersex disorders.
There are some types of intersex conditions that are not obvious at birth, and may not get discovered until puberty. So when you start to include all of those numbers in there, it could be as high as 1 in 500. And I have actually seen some numbers by some experts who I respect who will say it's even as high as 1 in 250.
Traditionally, the medical community referred to intersex people as a social emergency, rushing babies born with ambiguous genitalia into surgery to fix the child.
The idea of doing surgery on children, infants who are born intersex, began to develop in the 1940s as it also became technologically possible, which it wasn't earlier. In the 1950s, it was inconceivable that a mother could bond well to an XX child who had a very enlarged clitoris, one so large that it actually looked like a penis. The argument was that this was a mental health crisis for the parent and therefore for the infant.
The parents this, the parents are scared, the parents are traumatized. What will the parents tell their friends and neighbors? It's all about the parents, and the child gets forgotten about. So we're fixing the child, we're changing the child, we're surgically altering the child to make the parents happy. And there's something wrong with that equation.
It was a belief that they would be better off if we could identify a specific male or female role. And this included even trying to keep the information from the patient as they got older. And this really was prevalent for almost 20 years.
And often, doctors would assign a sex to the child based solely on the size of their genitalia.
You know, there's actual measurements at birth, you know, that a penis must be a certain size at birth, stretched, to qualify to be a normally developed penis, and that's about 2.5 centimeters. It's the same thing for a clitoris. If a clitoris is larger than about 0.9 centimeters at birth, medically, on the most basic term, is considered to fall outside of standard female. They will do periodically sex reassignment surgeries on boys born with something called micropenis, and they presume that the child will be happier as a girl rather than being a male with a small penis. You know, our society places a lot of value on the size of a man's penis, which is very, very sad. When we have a boy born with a hugely enlarged penis, and some boys are born with really, really big penises, we don't cut those down in size. Whereas if it's a woman with a big clitoris, it's like, oh my gosh, we can't have that. We can't have a girl running around with a big clit. She might be a lesbian. Or she might have gender identity disorders.
As intersex people mature, their lives can be filled with secrecy, shame, and unanswered questions.
What makes us male or female? Is it our genitals? Is it our chromosomes? Is it our gender identity? Is it the way you perceive my gender identity? Who's to say?
As Betsy searches for answers, she now runs an online support group called Bodies Like Ours. And it's her outreach that has made differences in people's lives. People like Lisa.
My daughter, Samantha, she has a big wrist genitalia due to congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is a disease that she was born with. When she was born, we thought we had a boy. We brought her home. 5 days later, we found out that she wasn't a boy, she was a girl.
Lisa's doctor advised her against early surgery, as is the emerging medical trend.
And of course, at that time, I was, you're crazy, I'm having surgery, there's no way around it. You know, I wanted my daughter to have the best life that she could possibly have. And at that time, because I wasn't educated enough, I thought that that was the only way she could have a good life.
Right after birth, the clitoris may actually be more engorged than it will be in 3 months. So, you know, clearly waiting several months to see exactly what the actual clitoral size will be is probably important to do. And it may not be as big an issue as it appears in that newborn period.
I was lucky enough to have God tell me, hey, wait a minute, you better slow down and take a good look. Because, you know, I would have made the wrong decision if I didn't see a program like this. I mean, people don't know. They don't know.
At least some of the parents I've encountered who refused to have surgery on their infants did it for religious reasons. They basically said, God gave me a baby that looked like this, and who am I to argue with God about it? So you don't have to be sort of liberal about sex and sexuality necessarily to say, go slow on surgery.
The intersex movement is only about 10 years old. I mean, we are still pre-Stonewall in our activism and in our awareness as to where we're going with this. But because there's a lot of marginalization within the queer movement, the LGBT movement, there is that marginalization, there is that shame. We have looked at them and as that model to help us through this. You know, somebody who has only experienced the stigmatization of being homosexual in this society that seems to hate us so much can understand what it's like to have your body physically changed for the same reason.
My child has undergone 4 genital surgeries to try to make her genitals look cosmetically female.
As a mother, I wanted my daughter to look normal, to fit right in.
As advocates argue for better research and more autonomy, intersex groups have captured the ear of the medical community.
When doctors decided that she should be brought up as a girl, their reason being that surgery to make her into a girl was easier to do than to change her into a boy.
In the spring of 2004, the City of San Francisco and the San Francisco Human Rights Commission heard the first ever governmental public hearing about intersex issues.
These babies were given no choice to keep what God gave them.
On that night in May, several people with intersex conditions showed up and they testified before the Human Rights Commission.
My child has tried to commit suicide twice in her 10 little years because she says she hates her body. She constantly asks me why they did the surgery.
Parents showed up as well. Scholars and medical ethicists showed up as well. The overwhelming theme that was repeated time after time after time during that evening, that public hearing, was how damaging the current medical protocol and the current medical state of affairs is.
She has articulated it to me this way, quote, "They thought I was no good, Mom. They scarred me up."
As a result of that public hearing, the Human Rights Commission and the Intersex Task Force of the Human Rights Commission in San Francisco has been preparing a report that will include medical findings, social findings, ethical findings, as well as recommendations in all three of those. If this report is adopted, and hopefully it will be adopted by the time this airs, the impact that this report will have on the current state of affairs for intersex treatment in the United States is going to be dramatic.
Who has the right to do that to anybody else's body? Mother, father, anybody. Who has that right to make that choice? And even if there's a 2% chance that something bad can happen from a cosmetic surgery, why wouldn't you just raise your children to be confident and to be proud of who they are and to be proud of their body? If we send the signal that it's okay to be ashamed of who you are because other people say so, then what kind of adults are they going to be?
Parents and relatives really need to take a deep breath and have the courage to see what it is in their own psyches that they're so afraid of, that they can't accept their children's dreams for whatever they are. Children are so precious, you don't want to write them off just because they don't end up being what you need them to be. So I would just say, you know, just keep searching and pray for the deliverance of your family if they're unaccepting, because it must be very painful for them to be who they are, because losing a child is the worst thing you could possibly do. Hi, I'm Susan Sarandon, and you're watching In the Life.
And finally tonight, Broadway icon and regular In the Life commentator Harvey Fierstein looks at the new face of a Broadway classic.
Oh, jeez. Are we ready? Getting all worked up. Oh, forget it. It's been more than 20 years since Jerry Herman and I sat down and wrote the musical La Cage aux Folles. Hard to believe? Take a look. Every day of those years can be seen in this face. But more importantly, take a look around the show's new Broadway revival and see a history lesson of where we were and where we came from. The idea of producing a musical with a homosexual theme took some balls back in 1982. After all, the movie La Cage, on which we were basing it, only grossed $2 million in the US. Now we were going to spend $6 million to put it up as a musical. Also, a musical with a gay theme had never been attempted. Even Torch Song Trilogy was just a downtown hit when we started writing La Cage, so it wasn't like we could measure anything from that. Politically, it was Reagan's first term, but we were still basking in our trouncing of Anita Bryant and those religious extremists. Cats was the biggest thing ever to hit Broadway, and AIDS was just showing its murderous face. Gay liberation was a legitimate movement, but no one had thanked a lover on a national award show yet. Of course, all of the usual Broadway pundits found the idea of La Cage to be charming. But then again, throw a weapon of mass destruction into a room of Broadway pundits and you won't hit a heterosexual. Still, caution was the word of the day. We have to be sensitive to our audience was the motto from the director and producers. And to that end, there was a lot of apologizing for being gay in that original production. Nothing dishonest, mind you, but tiptoeing and bowing to the heterosexual majority of ticket buyers that would seem silly to do these days. For instance, What was supposed to be a chorus of 12 drag queens included 2 biological women. Oh, we said it was a gimmick. Come see if you can guess which ones are the real girls. But truthfully, we were giving the straight guys an excuse just in case they were attracted to someone they saw on stage. This way, they could always claim it was one of the girls who inspired their excitement. Happily, today, all of the girls are boys, and it just feels so much more honest and celebratory and exciting. And by the way, in the first production, it took the boys a little while to get used to dancing around in heels. First day of rehearsal for this new generation, they took to their pumps like flamingos to feathers. After all, many of these young men had seen La Cage when they were kids and dreamt of one day being up on that stage in a production of the show. For some, this is a dream come true, and I think the audience can feel that. When first casting the lead characters, a gay couple that had been together for decades, we ran into quite a few performers who didn't want to play homosexual, and in fact, ended up casting 2, no doubt about it, heterosexuals in the parts. At the time, I begged our director to cast the roles gay. I said, you may have the most brilliant 20-year-old actress in the world. She simply can't play a grandmother. There are things life has simply yet to teach her. I was called a fool and told to keep quiet. A good actor is a good actor, and gay or straight doesn't matter. Well, years into the run, a gay actor finally took over one of those roles. On his opening night, our director phoned me to say, a gay man is now playing the role. And you were right. It makes a huge difference. This time around, the most interesting story I can tell you is when we offered one of the roles to a fabulously talented Broadway leading man, whom almost everyone knows is gay, he turned it down. In a very frank discussion, he said, Harvey, you're asking me to stand up on a stage and show the parts of myself that I have spent a lifetime trying to cover up. I can't do that. I was amazed, but not surprised. Another huge difference is the amount of physical contact the 2 leading men have. In the original production, they linked arms to dance together and I believe kissed on the cheek once. Currently, our leading men relate physically on par with any heterosexual couple that have been married 20 years. There is normal physical affection as well as the Broadway staple lip lock as the curtain falls. Politically, I must report this little change. The plot concerns a homophobic politician who can't imagine that a gay relationship can have the same legitimacy as a straight one. Considering the current climate of anti-gay marriage sentiment, I certainly didn't have to bring those elements up to date. Even the fictional name of the party sounds as if fashioned today, the TFM, the Tradition, Family, and Morality Party. I would say some things never change, but that's not true. All things change constantly. The problem is, most people don't. As for changes in those other circumstances, on the downside, 20 years later, AIDS is still a fact of life. On the upside, nowadays, when someone thanks a same-sex partner on an award show, no one even notices. Well, no matter the circumstance, La Cage aux Folles broke box office records back in the 80s and brought visibility and verifiability to our existence, even if just to a minuscule portion of the gay population. It rallied some pride, it changed some minds, it touched many hearts, and it opened doors for dozens of others to waltz through. I would be exceedingly proud if this revival did the same for a new generation.
I'm RuPaul, and for all of us at In the Life, thanks for watching, and we will see you next month.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by the Ford Foundation, the Overbrook Foundation, the Pride Foundation, and these funders. And the annual support of In the Life members like you.